I've been working on a project for the Atlas Center to examine the issue of driver distraction. The U.S. Department of Transportation is very interested in this issue because people die in distraction-related crashes. To solve that problem, or help solve it at least, the U.S. Department of Transportation has developed guidelines to determine what people should and should not do while driving. One of the procedures in those guidelines is the visual occlusion procedure. And the procedure is an attempt to simulate what happens in real driving. Specifically, here's what's occurring. People are driving, they look at an in-vehicle display, they operate some controls, and they return to the road. How do we simulate that easily? The way they do it is as follows. A subject in an experiment wears a pair of goggles, and those goggles are open or closed. That simulates looking at the device, the goggles are open, and looking back to the road, the goggles are closed. They have a detailed experimental procedure that describes the number of subjects, how much practice, how many test trials, etc., to comply with this procedure. The difficulty is that you need to have a completed interface to run the experiment, which either sits in a real car or a mock-up. And you can only do that when the design of the interface is almost complete, which is too late to do any subject testing. We're developing a method that allows one to take a paper prototype or a sketch of the interface and perform that evaluation. And in brief, what you need to know is first, how long do each of the steps take? Each mental operation, each button press, and so forth. And some of that exists in the literature. And the second thing you need to know is how do you adjust those times for the fact that the goggles are open, and you can do some things, and the goggles are closed, and you stop. And so we have a set of data from an occlusion experiment that we have examined in great detail to determine all these times. The major problem is how do you account for the fact that the goggles are open and people are doing things and the goggles are closed? And in theory, nothing should be done. Well, in fact, that's not quite the case. That when performing these tasks, the goggles are open, the goggles close, and people still finish some actions. For example, they'll press buttons and so forth, even though they're not looking at the display. And in theory, visual guidance is required. So what we tried to do by examining this data, and done very successfully, is to see when the rules about what happens with the goggles are open and closed, what the rules are in terms of how you do the calculations. So this is a pretty simple idea. We've analyzed existing data that we've already had in detail. And we found that basically the assumptions of the method are true. That is that pretty much people do things while the goggles are open and don't do things that require visual guidance when the goggles are closed. But that's not always true. And that's some of the exceptions we've identified. So how will this information be used? What we're doing is taking this research results that we have and developing a calculation method that goes in a document that has a name, SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, Recommended Practice J2365. That procedure describes how to calculate task times, and what we're doing is adding in this ability to look at the occlusion situation and examine task times for it. That procedure will be released in about another year. The big advantage is it shortens the development time by allowing designers and engineers to estimate if they're going to comply with the design guidelines before the system is ever built.